Okay. Doing 12 things at once. Mayor Hatfield,
Here.
Mr. St. John,
Here.
Mr. Gokenauer,
Here.
Mr. Ryba,
Here.
Mr. Lawrence,
Here.
and Mr. Elliott.
Here.
All right, thank you. So first up again is we just concluded the public hearing for both the Price and the Newman Industrial Park. But first up is this evening is the Newman Industrial Park AAA Holding LLC rezoning. Tim Newman is requesting the zoning of the Rocky property be changed from not zoned to planned industrial district for the northern half of the property. Approximately 16.7 acres, and that the southern half of the property with frontage on State Route 3637 remain not zoned. And again, for the purposes of doing this meeting on Zoom, we're trying to kind of make sure that it flows and that we keep it as well organized as we can for those who are either watching through video or go back and look at it later. So we'll go ahead and do much like we did in the public hearing and let it start off with Mr. Parkinson kind of reviewing the application and any of your report, and then we'll have the applicant speak.
Thank you, Mayor, Commissioners. Steve, can you bring up the exhibit, please? Before the commission this evening is an application to rezone 16.7 plus or minus acres of a 34.4 plus or minus acre tract that we refer to as Rocky property. It's on the north side of 3637, sandwiched in immediately to the east, the Sunbury Industrial Park today. To the west is the Vineyard Church. To the north is the new high school site that they're building the elementary and high school on. Obviously the zoning is industrial to the east with the Sunbury Industrial Park. It is C2 to the west and to the south. The high school is zoned A1. This exhibit shows the property outlined in yellow, and within the purple rectangle is the portion of the property that they propose to zone as planned industrial district. Mr. Newman is an officer of the applicant. The applicant is AAA Holdings. Mr. Newman is owner of Newman Roofing. Local businessman. His business is on North Columbus Street. He's outgrowing his current facilities and he wishes to build a new home for his business here on this property if he can get the proper zoning. Access will be provided through an extension of Kentner Parkway, which is the primary road within the Sunbury Industrial Park. There'll be no access today from this site onto 3637. The applicant is proposing a planned industrial district, and as such, they've laid out some possible lots, but the lots will be carved off, much as Vince Romanelli did when he developed Sunbury Mills. He didn't develop and create all those lots that are his out parcels. He created them as he had a buyer, as he has a need. He then divided off those lots one at a time. And Mr. Newman anticipates something of a similar approach here. As he finds opportunity or people interested in buying his property, he'll carve off what meets with their needs and develop accordingly in a progression, likely east to west. He's provided a corridor for an east-west extension of Kentner Parkway. He has also provided a corridor for a north-south roadway that will come from 3637 to the north property line. Those are simply, I guess I'll call them concepts at the moment. They're commitments on his part to provide us a way to get a road from here to there. And those are shown on his development documents that he's presented as part of his application. Let me, zoning. And what you can't see is in the background, I'm pulling up my zoning report review. If I'm still connected, here we go. And I wanted to see if there's anything that I overlooked here in the review. As we discussed, the southern part, or I think as was discussed, the southern part of the property is heavily wooded and it fronts on 3637. Today, that portion of the property is not part of this application. That property will remain unzoned. As opportunities present themselves in the future, Mr. Newman will evaluate the future development of that property and zone it accordingly at that time. The applicant submitted a fairly comprehensive application package. We've been through it. We've had some comments. They've provided some responses and some feedback. One of the things that was mentioned at the public hearing is that there's a commitment by the applicant that any elevation facing a public street will be constructed 100% with natural finishes. Stone, stucco, and other natural finishes, I believe is how it's worded within the development standards. This is a high standard for an industrial park. The stormwater for the entire 16.5 acres will be treated through a regional basin that will be constructed as part of the initial development with Mr. Newman's roofing company, as will the initial, and I'm going to shoot from the hip here, 200 or 300 feet of Kintner Parkway extension that will be needed to provide access to the Newman roofing facility. With that, I guess I will turn it over back to you, Mayor, and to the applicant.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Mr. Parkinson. So whoever is, I guess, Mrs. Gwynn will probably open things up for Mr. Newman.
Yes. Yes, thank you. And thank you, Mr. Parkinson, for the thorough review of the application. We appreciate it. As indicated, we did receive the staff report and we are presently working through the comments. Just to clarify, one of the things that was recently discussed in terms of the commitments for the finishes on the buildings, we have committed to the natural finishes for any roadway facing elevations, but it would not be the total wrap of the building, just the elevations that face a roadway. And as indicated on the site plan, you'll see that the property has been almost divided into kind of 3 sections. In Lot A, we do have a plan for that. Mr. Newman has outgrown his present facility and would like to expand operations for his approximately 20 employee business. And he's committed to a landscaping plan for that area, about 60 parking spaces surrounding the building, and about a 22,000 square foot building there. He operates in Sunbury now. He'd like to continue to do so. Lot B that's indicated on the site plan is also proposed for planned industrial, but as Mr. Parkinson noted, those lots are sort of in concept right now. They would be dictated as end users came on. And right now, this property is in a section that under the Village of Sunbury Comprehensive Plan is slated to go industrial. So we do meet the comp plan and meet compliance with that. And the final thing is Exhibit C, the area below to the south of the property that will remain unzoned at this time, with the applicant evaluating that at a later point in time. Just to touch a little bit more on Lot A, we have set aside some nice green space. It's about 2.5 acres of green space in there. The setbacks, we're going to comply with the setback requirements that are listed under the Planned Industrial Code, and those are all articulated in the text, and certainly we can answer any questions about any of that. We are working right now presently in terms of designing a stormwater plan, as well as obtaining water approval letters from Delco. That is still in process, and we've committed to doing that. So I'll let Mr. Williamson, our engineer, answer any questions about any of that, and then we'll be happy to take your questions.
I think the only thing I'd like to add to, Dave mentioned it earlier, we were talking about a regional detention basin for this area. Part of the driver for that too is that I think we're going to end up needing a lot of dirt for that road, for the east-west portion of Kentner. And you know, those lots on the north end of the site there, they are under that electric easement. So, you know, the buildings will have to be sitting north of that electrical easement. So, and the parking could be under in the easement. So I didn't want to, we were trying to not impinge those lots as much as we could. And if we can put all that stormwater in a central pond, and it's easy to do, we need the dirt anyway, it makes a lot of sense from a constructability standpoint. So that was kind of the driver for that. I mean, as we get into the grading, you know, I still think that'll probably be the case. So that's just part of the reason for why we're doing that.
Let me interrupt, if I might, for just a second. If I made it sound like I viewed that as a negative, I don't.
Oh, no.
I view that as a positive, and I'm glad
Yeah.
to see that you're doing it regionally as opposed to case by case. So that's a good thing in my opinion.
Yeah. That's all I have.
Okay, great. I don't know at this point if any of the commission members have any questions they would like to ask. We're going to go ahead and open it up there. That's always a good sign.
Well, so let me be the bad guy, because I play the role so well, and I've been fairly nice tonight. So we do have a couple of points of contention.
That's probably debatable.
Of mine that I'm curious as to how they might be resolved, or they might not be resolved, and then we can leave it with the commission to decide. One of the things I asked for was a legal description of the boundary of the property that is requested to be rezoned planned industrial. All we have right now, and this is no insult, this is what I call these kinds of drawings. We have a cartoon. We have a drawing with some lines on it, but it's not a meets and bounds description. It's not a bearings and distances. We'd like Mayor, we've had this issue across the street with Foreman, where all we have is a drawing that seems to show some, but we can't define the boundaries. We'd like to not revisit that issue. So to the extent that we can, I'd like to have, I've requested that a legal description of the boundary of that portion of the property that they're requesting to be rezoned be provided. I've also asked, we ask for, as part of our zoning, a utility plan. And we've been having conversations with the applicant's team on how to best manage the sanitary sewage needs of the planned industrial district. We've not gotten to an endpoint on that, where we've seen a utility plan that kind of shows what I've been asking for, nor have I been told that they can't provide what I've been asking for. I've just been told that they can't produce the exhibit yet. And I'm a little, I don't understand that entirely. Would appreciate a little assistance with that. I did ask for a general overall grading plan. I hope that that you're not about to tell me that you've got that done, because I might back off of that a bit. It's a big enough site that I'm pretty sure we can grade this thing the way it needs to be graded, and we'll just address it during engineering if you haven't yet done that. And then lastly, this is a planned district, and this is a little bit me, and I admit that, but this is a planned district. And the reason we have planned districts is, in my opinion, is to allow the development standards to be created, crafted, and journalized within the development plan. And so this is where we expect the applicant to tell us how what's his vision for his development. And that's where we set the standards for things like landscaping, signage, other types of sighting, architectural standards, maybe street lighting standards or other lighting standards within the development. And that's where these types of standards get journalized and specified within the documents. And I get it. It's an industrial park, right? It's not our prettiest part of town. It's never going to be our prettiest part of town, no matter how much lipstick we try to put on this pig. It's still a pig. But we didn't get much in the way of landscape standards or things of that nature. And I even conceded that if you don't want any, let's at least say that. Let's at least just say that there will not be any landscape standards beyond the requirements of the general code. And at least we've addressed something to that effect. And so that's still somewhat lingering. So I would place those all at the applicant and ask if there's some feedback this evening that I'm not been privy to.
This is David Bream. I can add a potential solution, I guess, to one of the three, and can't come close to addressing the other two. But the easiest one in my bailiwick is the legal description. A full survey would be expensive to complete if the rezoning isn't approved. So my suggestion would be that we add a contingency to the rezoning that require, and I do agree with you, Dave, certainly you're looking out for the village and well served. We do have property in the village that's rezoned, and we don't know for sure where it is. It was done a long time ago. There was never a legal description, and that is troubling. But in this case, to have the application approved with the contingency that the applicant provide a survey within a reasonable amount of time, 60 days or something, of the rezoning becoming final, consistent or substantially consistent with the application that's filed. It's got 6.435 acres to the approval of the village engineer and the village attorney, I think would solve that. That way they don't have to spend the money now until they know that it's something that actually serves a purpose.
Thank you. It makes sense. And then I don't know if any who from would like to address any of those other comments Mr. Parkinson made.
Well, I will address the legal description just initially, and I think that's a good solution. Just to clarify, with the filing, a legal in terms of the parcel description was submitted for the existing Paprocki property for the 34.359 acres. I think it was right behind the application in the binder. It's not a survey, but it is a legal that references meets and bounds. And I think if the village is amenable to it, that would be a good solution, that a contingency of any kind of rezoning approval would require a separate legal and survey to be prepared for the portion that's going to be under the PID. As noted, the applicant would prefer not to expend that cost if they're not going to be successful in getting the PID done. As to the articulation of the standards, certainly understand why that is important and understand why the village wants that. I believe that this has been resolved with respect to the signage. We have made a representation in the text that the signage will comply with the village code and are not seeking to do any kind of a planned district variance for that language. And we also, for Mr. Newman's, the Lot A, we have presented landscaping for that. I think that we could commit in the text that the landscaping for the rest of the remainder area will comply with generally the village code regarding landscaping, and that would be fine if we need a little bit more detail surrounding the articulation of those standards right now. As noted, given the way that this property, Mr. Newman intends to develop it, it's difficult to articulate standards without knowing who the end users are at this point.
As far as utility plan and grading plan, David, I agree. I think the site's large enough that I don't think grading it's going to be a problem since we have the pond in the right spot. On the utility end, we had put a utility plan together that was close enough, obviously, for that initial estimate we had for the water, sewer, and storm serving the Kentner Parkway going east and west. We've been a little hesitant on what to do with that future north-south road because there's just so many unknowns. Size and depth of that sewer coming up through there, exactly the route of the road. So we haven't, I guess we've been a little hesitant to, other than knowing that a water and sewer is going up there, investing a whole lot of time in that at this particular moment has been kind of on the back burner, I guess, is probably the best way to put that. But the immediate portion of the east-west with Kentner was what we had put together to do that estimate to, as we were looking at, possible cost estimates, possible TIF numbers and all that. So that's kind of just where we're at and how we prioritize it, I guess.
Yeah, Mr. Williamson, I wasn't, I agree with the concern for the north-south road, and that really wasn't my focus. My focus was on the area that's part of the PID, and that
Okay.
would run down Kentner Extension. And we talked about, do you build the sewer with the road and have it go downhill to the west and put your lift station down there and pump it all back until the trunk sewer comes up the north-south road, or you do something else? And we haven't seen what your decision is with regards to the ultimate plan to provide sanitary sewer to the PID area.
Gotcha. Okay, I'm with you now.
But Ms. Gwynn was suggesting, and I don't completely disagree, but obviously I don't completely agree, but there are some conversations going on regarding TIF and how some of those monies might be used to help offset some of these costs of development. The sewers is certainly a cost of development. I wasn't suggesting either, in case I wasn't clear, that sewer had to be installed with the construction of Newman Roofing. That would be a sewer that would be installed as he sold lots for the
Right.
owners and for them to use as they all came online later down the road.
Right. So, and in this particular plan, I don't know if I'm looking at the right one that you're looking at, because I just grabbed our latest one. The proposed Newman Roofing would be just served by a grinder pump for that specific building.
Yes.
And then if the road gets developed farther west, there would be a lift station set. I'm going to say that, call it that southeast corner of those two future roads coming together. And then that's where that lift station would be, that would then pump back to the existing manhole.
You turned yourself off somehow, Michael.
I did turn myself off, sorry. So there'd be a lift station there, and then in that southeast corner of those two future roads coming together. And then that would be where we would then pump back to that manhole next door there.
Yes.
Where we're connecting now. So then originally, eventually that lift station would be removed whenever that sewer comes up from the north-south, coming up 36, 37, whatever that trunk is. That's when that lift station would be removed and connected. We do have a plan that shows some of that. We can submit I thought you might even had some of that when we were talking some of the budget numbers, but it may not have been the official submittal.
Yeah, I don't think it got input into the application.
Okay.
And
Yeah, we can get to that.
To the commission, that might have sounded Greek, but that's what I wanted to hear.
So as far as a contingency also to this would be, I guess we would add that to just include that as part of this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Are you making progress with Delco?
Yes, I contacted them today and left a message. I would expect to hear back from them within the week.
I would too. For the commission's benefit, I asked about a service letter from Delco. I have no doubt that Delco, how do you say this, double negatives, cannot serve it with water. But we generally require these service letters as part of our zoning applications to know. And that has not been, Delco's not been able to provide that to this point in time. I would like to add a third contingency now that the Delco service letter be provided.
Okay. And I was just trying to keep these organized, Mr. Parkinson, but I know Mrs. Gwynn replied on landscaping, but was there a contingency there you were talking about too?
No, I don't believe so. I believe that they are, well, I'll let Ms. Gwynn. I heard that they are not going to impose landscape standards upon within their development documents. That they are imposing, I don't know if imposing is the right word. They are proposing with Mr. Newman's development some robust landscaping with his building and site, but they are not prepared at this time to impose those standards upon the other developments within the PID, as Ms. Gwynn said, because they're not sure who the users are and how it might negatively impact their ability to develop that site. So.
But they would comply with the zoning code. I mean, I heard her say that.
Yes, I think that's what Ms. Gwynn, is that what you
Yeah,
said?
that we could commit to that in the text. Yes, I think the text, Tim, is that acceptable to you?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, at the end of the day, we're going to be developing that property sometime, and it as Dave said, it may not be pretty, but at the end of the day, there's going to be a lot more traffic with those two schools, and I want it to look good. I want it to represent Sunbury well, and so yeah, if I'll be honest, I haven't looked at the Sunbury landscaping laws or rules, but at the end of the day, I'm okay with whatever language we need to put in there to say that, you know, whatever is going to be developed back there is going to have some kind of landscaping plan to it, because we don't want an eyesore. I mean, that's just just like I'm sure the village of Sunbury doesn't either, but me personally, I don't, everything that I do, I do it the right way, and I want it to look nice. So yeah, I'm okay with that.
Well, and I just feel the need to comment there, Mr. Newman. I would agree. I mean, you've taken a series of buildings along Columbus Street there and the other road and made them look very nice. I mean, your area there is something you can be proud of, and I do appreciate that. And you know, so I think for the sake of this, though, I was just trying to keep it. And so, Mr. Bream, I don't know from your standpoint if that's unusual, that obviously they're going to, what they're developing and what's getting rezoned today, they're complying with, and they're committing to comply with the future area that's, well, I shouldn't say the future area, other sub areas within the rezoned area that they're not sold, they're not developed. So is there something we need to capture there?
Well, I think, as has been referenced, there are a few contingencies we're looking at. My notes are a little unclear. Molly, did you say that the signage will comply with the code language?
Yes, and that is in the text, I believe.
So we don't need to address that. It's already there.
Okay.
The landscaping will comply with the village code. You committed to add that language, and you can explore with your client. To the extent you want to go beyond that, obviously it's fine, but your commitment tonight is, you know, that it'll at least comply with the code. And then Dave, the finalization of the plan as far as the utilities, how did you word that?
That's fine. Just finalize the overall sanitary sewer concept.
So
And
really, I think we're left with three contingencies for tonight that have been discussed so far anyway. Contingent upon the applicant providing a legal description of the plus or minus 16.435 acre property to be rezoned in substantial compliance with the application to the approval of the village engineer. Number two, that the text be supplemented that landscaping will comply with the village code, which is again nice to put in the text, but as a practical matter, it's stating the reality, which is anybody who develops has to comply with the code, whether it's in the text or not, but at least it satisfies Dave's contention that we've at least talked about it, and there's something about landscaping in there to the extent the applicant as far as we can. Number 3 would be the finalization of the overall sanitary plan for the property to be rezoned only. And then I guess there's a 4th one, that the Delco service letter be provided.
That sounds right. Mr. Mayor, if I might, please. I'd like to kind of take a sidebar. We've actually got 2 things going along at the same time here that are sort of separate, but they're joined at the hip, and it's understandable. Before Mr. Newman can think about buying this property and can think about zoning it, he has to have some comfort level that he's going to be able to develop his business on a lot within this district. And so he spent a lot of time and money and effort into laying out his 4.5 acre site for his new business. And he put a lot of thought into it with where would the parking be? What would the building look like? How would it sit? Where would the driveway be? Landscaping, signage, and all the typical things that one would put together for what we at Sunbury would know as a major site plan approval. He needed to know that he was going to be able to get that to work, or it didn't make any sense for him to try to even get the zoning going. And so what's happened over the course of the zoning, once we sort of got, yeah, that looks good, Mr. Newman, we think that could work. And we started moving into the zoning application. We drug along a lot of those major site plan elements with us into the zoning. And these are things that we don't normally see in zoning. We don't normally see the specifics of a individual site. What we see are the general standards for development within the district. But in this case, they're kind of following the site specifics. So what I want to do is just take a moment to remind the applicant that if the zoning is approved, you still got to come back for a certificate of zoning compliance and a major site plan approval. And we're going to talk about all this stuff again. We're going to talk about your landscaping and your parking and your setbacks and your architectural standards, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now you set the table. It's going to be a very short discussion, and we're going to get to the finish line pretty darn quickly. But that's a separate and distinct action that has to happen that we've kind of blended with this zoning. And that's why there's some things that are very specific in here that we're not accustomed to seeing.
Thanks, Dave. Does anybody else have any questions specific to this? And again, I mean, if we were to, I mean, I think Mr. Parkinson just, acknowledged that there's more to come, but that if the zoning board wanted to, we could approve this tonight with the contingencies that were mentioned. And I don't know from a timing perspective if that's, what you were looking to achieve this evening, and but also anybody that has any questions that you need to get clarified.
I'd like to make a motion to approve with contingencies. I think some of the contingencies are redundant and just within the code inherently, but we'll call them out as Mr. Parkinson called out. Make a motion.
So a motion to approve with the contingencies that were outlined by Mr. St. John.
Second.
Second by Mr. Gokenauer. And real quickly, Dave, yeah, why don't you?
Steve, do you feel like you have a good handle, Steve Piles, as far as creating the minutes on the 4 contingencies, or would you like me to restate that?
I've got them.
Okay.
Any other clarifying questions, comments? Roll call.
Mr. St. John,
Yes.
Mr. Gokenauer,
Yes.
Mr. Ryba,
Yes.
Mr. Lawrence,
Yes.
Mr. Elliott,
Yes.
and Mayor Hatfield.
Yes.
6 ayes, rezoning's approved.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Newman and team. We appreciate you, what you're doing, and hopefully it gets to move forward.
Thanks a
Well,
lot.
I
Thank you.
appreciate the time.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, before they leave, can we give them our understanding of the schedule moving forward?
I guess if we have to clue them in, we'll, this obviously has to go on to council and requires another public hearing. And there's a time frame in between, which I think it's 30 days. So I'm not looking at the calendar here, but let me, Parkinson, if you have that already, you can chime in, but if you don't, I'll.
The first Wednesday is July 1st, so that might be too close. It might have to be the 15th.
Yes, since today's the first. So the second meeting in July, we would be able to take this back up with, at a council, there'd be a hearing. And again, we'd go through that again and then invite you to the council meeting. And then again, legislation, everything would get put together that would have 3 readings and an approval process and a 30-day waiting period. And of course, we can entertain to shorten that if there's a need to do that, to help you facilitate moving forward. All right. Well, thank you again for coming. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Mr. Pyle, Mr. Parkinson, and we'll provide you with what you need to do.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
All right, next up is commission review of the Price Ponds Romanelli Company rezoning. The Romanelli Company LLC is requesting to rezone approximately 183.97 acres from not zoned to planned residential district. The property is located along Golf Course Road and at the intersection with Cheshire Road. Again, we had the public hearing this evening. This is the second time we'll have gone down the process for this property. And I think as we talked about previously, it's gotten better. And so with that, I'll toss it over to Mr. Parkinson and ask him to give us a recap real quick here.
Thank you, Mayor, Commissioners. This is an application to rezone approximately 184 acres of the Price Farms from its current unzoned classification to a planned residence district. The applicant is the Romanelli Company. Back in late 2017 and early 2018, a different developer had submitted a similar application. It made its way through the Planning and Zoning Commission and on to council, where it had 2 readings. At that point, the applicant had the application held and subsequently withdrew the application, and it was not approved. The application consists of 336 single-family residential lots. And I've lost my place. There it is. On 184 acres, which is 1.8 dwelling units per gross acre. The surrounding, their request is for a PRD. The land to the south, the east, and to the northeast is already PRD. The land to the north is R2 and includes the middle school. The land to the northwest is large lot, single family residences. They are currently in the township. The development will have 199 60 by 120 foot minimum lots and 137 70 by 130 foot lots. They'll have almost 94 acres, which is over half of the total site, as open space. They'll be donating, or dedicating rather, and deeding to the village almost 21 acres at the northeast corner of the a densely wooded stand that's immediately adjacent to the GRE park. They will have trails within the site through preserves and walking trails throughout their open spaces. A regional multi-use trail will be constructed through the middle of the site, going generally east to west. The internal trail system will connect to rolling hills to the south, the middle school and GRE. The roadway connections, the main entrance will be off a golf course road, about 300 feet south of the intersection with Cheshire. There will be connections to the south to Rolling Hills, connection to the north to Magnolia Park, and a connection to the east to Sunbury Mills. And through the extension and connection to Millstone Drive. The roads will be 28 feet wide and 50-foot right-of-ways. They have requested 5 divergences, which are generally consistent with recent approvals of similar developments in Sunbury. Divergence number 1 is a front yard setback requirement to 25 feet for 60-foot lots and 30 feet for 75-foot lots. For divergence number 2, they're requesting for the rear yard setback that non-conditioned rooms, patios, and decks be allowed to encroach up to 10 feet into the rear yard setback. Divergence number 3, the applicant is requesting a divergence from the minimum building separation requirements to allow a minimum of 14 feet between buildings without the need for masonry walls, a firewall, or a wall without any openings. Divergence number 4 is to request a divergence from the maximum lot coverage requirements to allow for up to 30% for 2-story homes, 35% for 1-story homes on 70-foot lots, and up to 40% for 1-story homes on 60-foot lots. Divergence number 5, the applicant is requesting a waiver from the requirements of the major tree replacement section of the code due to the impracticality of complying. The applicant is proposing, though, to plant 2,165 replacement trees as well. And these are broken down into 644 street trees, which is about 2 per lot, 1,008 yard trees, which is about 3 per lot, and 513 trees to be planted in open and buffer areas. The applicant is also proposing a contribution of $250 per house to be remitted at the time of building permit as additional compensation to offset the tree removal. Additionally, they are deeding 21 acres of legacy woods to Sunbury. And that concludes, oh, I'm sorry, allow me to continue. There are 2 cul-de-sacs that have lots that are have irregular lot lines. We addressed this issue with Magnolia Park about a year ago, where when you get onto the bulb of the cul-de-sac, it is hard to maintain radial and straight right angle lot lines. The code does provide for the commission to grant variations to this specific rule independent of normal subdivision variance procedures, which we have assumed to mean that they can approve it through this process where they recommend approval to council. And I believe that's how, I can't recall exactly how we did it with Magnolia, but that is an option to the commission for those. We did ask for a corridor to be preserved from the existing corner of Cheshire and Golf Course Road to the existing entrance drive in the event that a roundabout was ever constructed at the corner of Golf Course and Cheshire. During the public hearing, the applicant committed to providing for that corridor. And then Lastly, we noted that in the original application, the applicant had provided a compacted gravel walking trail through the 21-acre wooded site so as to create a loop within the wooded areas. And that was not part of the original application by the Romanelli Company. And so that concludes my report. You're muted, Tommy.
You're muted.
I'm trying to get there, but somebody got there before me. I said I liked saying things that you can't hear. So, but anyway, we'll go ahead and turn that over to Sarah, or whoever from Romanelli.
Sure, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Parkinson, and good evening, commissioners. I'll try not to beat a dead horse, but for the record, Sarah Radcliffe with Kephart Fisher on behalf of the applicant, and we also have Gary Smith with G Planning and Jim Olin on behalf of the developer. Like Mr. Parkinson said, we have these 336 residential lots. We're very excited to be in this part of the village. We are connecting, of course, to the surrounding neighborhoods, which we think will be a good fill-in for that area. A lot of walkable trails from the neighborhoods up to the schools. The provided dedicated space in the northeast corner with those trails, which I know from the previous submission, it was discussed between the commissioners and the previous applicant about doing the loop. I would just say we have a lot of trails going through this area already, and we want to preserve as much of that area as wooded space, kind of buffering between the neighborhoods. So we really feel like that the trail that we have currently should be sufficient. I mean, we're open to talk about it and discuss some options, but we did leave out the loop part, just thinking that there's a clear direct path as it is from these neighborhoods up to the north. So we find that to be sufficient. And there's plenty of walking trails throughout. So that's kind of one area that I wanted to address that was brought up in the comments. We discussed the corridor to the northwest corner that will preserve to accommodate any need for the roundabout if that were to be the case down the road. As far as, I guess we can all discuss the cul-de-sacs and the fact that the right angles and to the street lines and how we kind of want to work with that just in those two areas. I'm not sure of a better design that we can come up with. I can hand that over to Gary and the rest of the commissioners if we want to discuss that in more detail. Trying to think of a few other comments that you brought up. But again, the one thing that we did revise that was brought up in the public hearing, that is the gross density, that 1.83, which is part of the code. And we fixed that in the text. We might have needed to fix that on the plans, but I just wanted to state for the record that that is the gross density is the 1.83. So with that,
I can, sorry, Sarah, I
ahead.
didn't mean to step on your toes there.
Go ahead.
I can address the cul-de-sac issue. You know, I think the lots work pretty well the way they're designed. If the village is comfortable granting a variance for those lots, the biggest part about that is obviously making sure that the houses fit on the lot themselves, making sure that the box is available to put those footprints in, and then making sure that we have a clear and concise way to get those driveways out to the street. And so I think that they function fine. I think that we can do that. If we need to re-examine that as we go through the final engineering and the platting process, we can certainly do that and work with Mr. Parkinson and get that taken care of. So that hopefully.
I checked the screen. Is my drawing up?
Yep, it sure is.
So these are the two locations. For the commissioners, I support this design. I have no problem with it. I think it's as elegant as you can do in these little corners. I take no issue with them. We just need to do whatever it is we have to do to be able to approve them. And like I say, I believe it's nothing more, and Mr. Bream's going to weigh in on this, I'm sure. nothing more than an overt acknowledgement of this deviation from the standards. Is I believe that the Planning Commission can approve this with such an action. And
Yeah,
it does not require a formal variance. I guess that's what I'm saying. From reading the code, it sounds like they have a way to approve this without actually doing a formal variance.
perfect. And I think we would be fine with that as long as the village is comfortable doing that. From our standpoint, it's easier to line up the lots the way they are. We only need a certain lot size. So if you looked at some of those, the only other way to slice that pie was actually to encroach further into the open space. And the only thing we would be doing is giving each of those lot owners not a more buildable lot, just a little bit larger lot, but we'd be eating into the open space to do that. And we felt that just having that as part of dedicated open space was a little bit more important there. So I think it functions and it works pretty well. We're pretty comfortable with it. And I think we can get through the engineering process and prove that those work. Just, overall site plan, like Sarah said, I know we've been down this road a couple of times. I think the only thing that I want to say to finish up is, we really feel like this is a vast improvement over the initial site plan that was submitted. Almost everything is kind of gone up in our favor. The open space has gone up from 47% to 51%, which is from 80 acres to 93.9 acres. The density has stayed the same, but the lot sizes on an average have gone up, and we've tried to incorporate a little bit more diversity in terms of the depth and the variance of some of those lots. And if you look at the plan, the way that it's designed now versus the way that it was designed before, we have a considerable greater number of lots that actually back up or abut open space than was true before, because we've wrapped open space into some of those more densely packed areas and spread the site plan out a little bit. So we're creating a tremendous amount of value by giving a lot of those lots additional open space and views onto that open space. We think that this plan is a vast improvement. And with that, I think Sarah touched on the issue of the path itself. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Sarah would be happy to answer any questions, and Jim is here as well.
All right, so let's take a minute and see any of the commission members, what you all have questions.
I have a question. This is Greg Elliott. So addressing the public from the public hearing, the gentleman's concern, the backing up to his lot, is that, I think he said it was about 75 feet. I don't know if we know what that length is between those lots and his property line, and I don't think there's anything we can do to stop people from going through the woods, but that seems like a lot is 75 feet right? And that seems like a fair amount of space. David, do you have any issue with that?
I can answer your question, Greg. I actually checked it during the break, and we're actually, it's 80 feet to the rear lot line. It's actually 110 feet from the setback line of the house. And one of the things that we can do, I know you mentioned you didn't think that there was anything that we could do to keep people from encroaching, but that's not actually true. We can actually write in the deed restrictions and the homeowners association docs. What we'll do is we'll label that as a preserve area. And so nobody can touch it. And we can also insert penalties into the HOA documents or the deed commitments that, if you do actually encroach into those areas or cut down any existing trees in those areas, that the property owner could be subject to different types of penalties. So I think there are things that we can do to keep people from encroaching into that area. And we feel like that's a pretty substantial buffer along the backs of those homes and just keeping those existing trees in place.
Okay.
If I may, Gary, I think that's a great suggestion. And Greg, just to bring you kind of up to date, in the previous versions of this development, that wooded buffer was not there, and we as the commission members pushed for that buffer to be put in there. So it's greatly better than what it originally was.
Got it. Okay. Good.
All right, other questions?
This is David Bream. I would also concur that the homeowners association has a civil right of action for a property owner that encroaches onto their common areas. So any member of the community could go to the homeowners association, and the homeowners association as an entity could try to combat any encroachment off of a property. Just because your property sits adjacent to HOA property doesn't give you any right to go on the HOA property other than as identified in the HOA documents. And I think Gary has a great suggestion. To the extent it's not public open space, it's designated as a preserve area. That further cements the fact that really no one should be in there. It's just a buffer of green space, which I think most homeowners would be happy to have and happy just to have to look at and not have to maintain.
Yep. Great. And then I think the density thing, assuming that's correct, I know he mentioned the land being deeded back and increasing the density, but again, I'm not an expert on it, but I just want to make sure we're addressing that somehow or some way.
This is David Bream again. I mean, to the extent they're deeding property to the village, we really can't have it both ways. We can't
Right.
say we want this nice treat area and deed it to us, but then hold it against them when it comes to their density calculations. So
Gotcha.
again, this is well within what the limits are for this type of a zoning classification, with or without that additional acreage, frankly. And the density for this development is less than what it was in the previous approval, as Gary's mentioned, and I think several of the applicants and their representatives have mentioned another significant improvement from what was previously proposed, and really on the eve of being approved, had it not been withdrawn by the applicant at that time. So,
Okay.
One correction, David, the density is actually the same. We have exactly the same number of lots. But every other aspect of the development has really shown improvement in terms of the amount of open space, the lot size.
My last question, I think for now, as far as the homes and how they're closer together, is there any risk to that? I know that you mentioned, Gary, that, that's kind of the standard now going forward, but is there any risk that or inherent, anything that could cause any issues in the future that we should at least be aware of?
No, there really isn't. I mean, if you actually go back into the 50s, having houses, pretty close together was really quite common. And this works with, all current building codes. It doesn't create an issue. I know the gentleman mentioned we couldn't have fireplaces. That's not actually the case. Those houses can still have fireplaces. They can still have chimneys. So there really isn't anything from a safety standpoint, from a density standpoint, from a lifestyle standpoint that raises an issue for having houses 14 feet apart. As I mentioned, it's pretty common these days, and especially if you look at a lot of the patio home communities, to have 5-foot side yards, have houses 10 feet apart, and it still works and functions pretty well.
Okay. I guess, and I'm done only because this kind of pertains to me personally also, is that power line that the one other gentleman did mention.
Yeah.
And it does run right behind my house. So is there anything that is planning or thought about with that? And if the answer is not yet, but we're looking into it, that's okay also.
That is exactly the answer. As I mentioned before, we're kind of in the early stages of having, having conversations with AP and what their expectations are for the relocation of that. And so we'll know more as we move forward with more detailed engineering and as we get into final development plans, which I think we'll have to come back in front of you as well.
Perfect. Thanks. I'll stop now.
You're fine. Thank you.
Just some additional feedback on that power line. Prior to COVID, we were meeting with AEP on duplication of that particular electrical line. We're well aware. You're in my neighborhoods, Greg. We're heavily impacted by the power outages. Rick, you as well, last year. And AEP is actively working on it. I can tell you from my perspective, it's not fast enough, but we can incentivize them, especially as development occurs, to work with developers to come up with a beneficial solution for all.
Thanks, Joe.
This is Rick Robb. I had a question for the village development standards. Will this development then be parking on one side of the street? I know we were talking about that going forward, changing that in the development plans.
Most likely, yes. It's hard to have parking on two sides of a 28-foot street and be able to get the emergency equipment through if there's significant number of cars parked on it. So the downside to not having your 36, 37-foot wide road is we're going to have to limit parking to one side. And I've been saying this a lot, but this is consistent with what we're doing in a lot of the other developments that we've recently approved. You'll see a lot of no parking on one side. And that's the side we'll put the fire hydrants on, or try to put the fire hydrants in the mailboxes on. So.
Do we need to have that in here anywhere or no?
No, that's generally something that comes up during the plan review portion when they do their construction drawings to make sure that that's all coordinated.
All right, any other questions? All right, do we have, if we were to approve this evening, do we have any, I kind of lost a little bit of a count there, but do we have anything that we had to add is from a contingency standpoint, or is it all what we need within the language that's there today?
The only contingency that I think is a change that I heard, but Dave Parkinson, jump in at any time, was the applicant has agreed to institute additional language into the HOA docs that designate preserve areas as discussed and institute some type of penalties. That language to be to the approval of the village engineer.
And Ms. Radcliffe, how are you intending to handle the preservation of the corridor at the entrance? Will there be an exhibit in the drawings that show it, or does there need to be some language that you'll do it?
Whichever you guys prefer, I guess, is how we would do it. We could put it in the text, we could put it on the plans. Trying to think of our open space currently. I think it does include that area, but however you would like it.
Yeah, it includes the area, but there's a little pond in the way.
Yeah, and we're going to talk with our engineer to see if that pond needs to be moved at all, if we are going to be dedicating a certain designated area. I think we're working with, did David Deniston get back from Advanced Civil Design about if that pond needs to be moved or not, or we're still kind of.
He did. Yeah, I talked to David Deniston a little bit earlier, Dave, and what he mentioned was that we could just split that pond and basically put the same easement in place that covered the right of way that was there before. And so we would just split that pond on either side of that, what we will call future right of way, or an easement for future right of way. And accommodate it. So he didn't feel like that was a problem. They're going to work through the numbers, and we could get you a display at some point as we go through the final engineering, and you can make that a contingency of approval or however you want to do it.
So Mr. Bream, do we need it as a contingency, or can we allow the testimony committing to this to satisfy the need?
My preference would be let's just incorporate it as an additional contingency. It's less easy to forget it inadvertently if it's an actual contingency. So the second contingency would be upon the applicant incorporating into the plans a future easement for right-of-way in the northwest corner, correct?
Yeah.
Of the development to facilitate potential future roundabout construction.
And then we kind of jumped from the backyards to over there, but so those will be two different contingencies, the preservation on those specific lots in the HOA area, and then the drive in the front, the roundabout potential. So
Those are the two, correct.
just wanted to make sure. All right, any other questions or comments? All right, well, I'll go ahead and make a motion to approve this with those two contingencies.
Second.
Okay, second by Mr. Elliott. So any other discussion or comments? I really do like the plan. I like the, the last time this was about the woods, and that really seemed to kind of overshadow everything. And you all have embraced that, and I do appreciate that. But I really like the layout and how virtually all of those lots have open space to the rear. I know if I were looking for a home, that would be something that's important to me. Kind of gives you that bigger feeling like Dave Preem said, without having to pay for it or maintain it, which is always a plus. Matter of fact, if I could give up my backyard that somehow and do that, I think I would. But anyway, anybody else have any other comments or questions? All right, roll call.
Mr. Gokenhour,
Yes.
Mr. Ryba,
Yes.
Mr. Lawrence,
Yes.
Mr. Elliott,
Yes.
Mayor Hatfield,
Yes.
and Mr. St. John.
Yes.
6 ayes.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Y'all have
Thanks,
a good evening.
everyone.
All right, next up is a major site plan for it's Etler Building Systems has submitted a application for the construction of an additional 12,000 square foot trailer manufacturing and warehouse building on behalf of Gerling and Associates. The property is located at 200 Kentner Parkway, and this is continued from our April meeting. And so in the fashion that we've been following along here this evening, Mr. Parkinson, we'll put you in the hot seat first and bring everybody up to date.
Thank you, Mayor. At this point, it renders down to something pretty simple. They're proposing a 12,000 square foot steel building at the rear of the Gerling broadcast trailer manufacturing site at 200 North Kentner. The front of the zoning is industrial. The use is industrial. It's consistent with the zoning class and the surrounding uses and the uses on the site. They've submitted a request for a zoning certificate and major site plan. The original application showed 2 buildings with 2 extensions. They are now just show the 1 building with the future extension and the future other building. So the application is a little more streamlined. They're proposing parking in accordance with the code. They're going to modify the existing stormwater management system on site to provide for the required storage and treatment. There is some landscaping at the far east end of the site designed to provide a buffer and a visible barrier to the residential uses to the east. They are proposing to install slats within an existing chain link fence to provide a visual barrier from Kentner Parkway. They will use existing water and sewer services for the site for the new building. And they've submitted some lighting details in a lighting photometric plan that is deemed acceptable. It does not, under this proposal, impact upon the neighbors. And The landscaping consists of, whoops. 8 to, looks like 12 or so arborvitaes mixed in with the existing evergreen plantings along the east property line. And they've provided in the building is a classic steel building all around with a very low pitch roof. I've provided a couple of reports on this now, and I hope the commissioners have had a chance to review for the outstanding issues. And with that, I'd ask I'd return it to you, Mayor. You're muted again.
Okay. I wanted to go ahead and give everybody else a chance. Any questions or comments that you'd like to ask? You know what? I'm going to go ahead. I need to give. I just realized Mr. Etler or is it Minix is also on here?
It's Nick Elmasian.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll go ahead and. Oh yeah. I'm sorry, Nick. See you there. Give you guys a chance to kind of talk through and respond to Mr. Parkinson.
Jim, did you want to go first?
I'll just make a couple comments. I think you've covered pretty much everything we discussed in the past, and I think we've addressed things with the fire department. Still need to clarify some things so we can get our final drawings corrected properly. There's an area in the front where you talked about the chain link fence and putting some slats in. That was actually my idea, but I really don't. I'd like to forget about that. We need to tie that pavement together with the existing pavement to pick up continuity between the drainage that we're taking off the existing pavement. We're bringing it down across the pavement into the ponding area. If we leave the fence in, we're going to be leaving some ground in. And the other reason is if you've been out there, seen the property, there's very, very limited visual from Kintner. You would have to drive back to behind the buildings to see these new buildings. There's trailers parked back there. Their backlog is so big right now. They're parking trailers all over this back lot, and the area that we don't need for car parking in the pavement area, we'd like to see available for storing trailers in. They come back for modifications, but they park them wherever they can find pavement to park them on. I don't think it's necessary. I think we put some split face block frontage on the part of the front, half of the front of the building and the side of the building. I believe I may have misled the architect, or I misunderstood the owner, but they wanted more height to work on top of their trailers. So I raised the building to 8 or 20 feet. Every other building I built back there for them is only 18 foot. And I would like a chance to discuss with the owner, and if I could bring the sidewalls down to 18 foot and maybe put a little bit more slope on the roof so they can still get people up on the roof to put air conditioners on, skylights or whatever they do on those trailers. And we'll change it accordingly because I think they can live with an 18-foot high building, which will bring the perimeter down, and we'll still have gable ends in both ends of the building. But of course, the east side will eventually be covered up with a future building. And the front side, we're using that masonry wall to put a cap over the office area. So we can make benefit of that. So other than that, I think we've tried to accommodate everything. And if Nick has any more questions or any more comments, have at it.
The only thing I still wanted to mention was we are going to put 20 feet of pavement. It's going to be temporary. It'll be pavement on the eastern side of the building, but I wanted to get clarification on how far back that needs to go for the access to 3 sides.
I just think intuitively one would say the full length of the building.
Okay. So otherwise, I don't think we have any issues. We've kind of hashed that stuff out with the review comments. I don't think there's anything that we're concerned about, but if there's any other comments or questions, we're open to hear those.
Has the fire department approved your plans?
The fire department got back to us today via email. They've signed off on most. I can forward you their email.
I don't need it now. Not gonna do anything with it now, but so what did the email say? That they will approve your plan?
They basically said that it still needs a security system. They wanted to see the pavement on the east side of the building.
We don't need fire suppression system. We do not need it. We can separate the buildings into 12,000 square foot. And that meets building code.
His concerns before was we hadn't shown the fire hydrants before. He does want that fire line tested, the 12-inch line over to the east. Delco has said that they would test it. They tested the one out by the street and previously had the records. So we need to get the testing approved for that 12-inch line. But I don't see an issue with that. They were okay with the turnarounds for the trucks. Then one of the temporary pavement, obviously on the east side of that building, they were okay with the use. They encourage the owner to install a fire alarm system, but it's not necessarily required. And then when the board, please follow the directions and the provisions for further plan approval, permit and reviews. So are we needing full approvals for them to get this? Is that a conditionary item?
I don't know that it's a conditionary item, but we like to know that the fire department's on board before we don't want to approve something they can't approve.
Yeah, from his comments, I don't see any issues that would be outstanding that would be problematic. The only thing that still needs to get done is that testing of that 12-inch line.
Okay.
Mr. Parkinson, would you agree with their assessment that all of the things listed in your report have been accounted for? I mean, obviously, like the fire department, we're hearing it's.
Well, many of the things in my report are somewhat subjective, and they require the input of the commission that's going to make their decision. I can't make that decision for you. Is the site far enough into the property that you can't see it from the street? I don't know. Okay. Are the existing trees and the dozen arborvitaes that they're proposing for the property line between the residential and this site, does that comply with the landscape buffer requirements for a 6-foot high planting hedge, fence wall, or earthen mound? They did away with the earthen mound proposal. They did away with the ditch, which was good, and they're going to use storm sewers on that end of the property. But if, does that comply? in your opinion. And the code, it doesn't do what the code says, but it's obvious that the applicant is using this combination to satisfy the intent of these requirements. Removing the slats removes any effort to provide a landscape barrier or visual buffer between Kentner Parkway and the building. But I think I said in my original report, it's 600 feet away, and you got to look through all the trailers and all the existing buildings to see it. Is that a good enough reason not to require the screening? There still is no screening plan for the building, but does the trees and the arborvitaes satisfy that need?
I would say no. I felt like the strongest part of our feedback, and I went back and verified minutes. We addressed the abutting residential neighborhood from a setback perspective, from a landscape perspective, mounding perspective. We gave examples, use cases, and quite a bit of feedback on that. And I know that seemed like overwhelmingly the largest point that we asked them to address, and to not address the mounding or the 3.5 foot average height continuous fence, and simply use existing trees and then to add some additional trees. I feel like it was not satisfactory in terms of addressing the property and the plans.
Yeah, my opinion is like Mr. Parkinson said, that we're 600 feet away from Kentner Parkway. Slats and a fence is probably the least concern. The concern is the residences abutting to the property, and how do we address that? So I do feel like we could do better than what's proposed.
I would concur. I guess my thought process is I'm not concerned with what it's going to look like from Kentner because, like you said, of the distance, but there is a concern of pushing this all the way back against the residents. And that's where I think it needs more screening.
Is there an opportunity, and I don't know, I haven't looked in detail enough. Is there an opportunity to shift everything to the west a little bit, or is that not feasible because of, I'm not a civil engineer, so I don't know if that's even possible, but is there an opportunity to do that, to give more space between the properties and the east side of their property?
I mean, there's definitely ability to move to the west, but is that for screening purposes? Because my thought would be to either add more trees or put some type of screening in that chain link fence we're proposing on the east side.
I'm just throwing it out there as a thought. I don't know, right? I think it's got to satisfy everyone on the council, right? Whatever the decision is.
Right. So I was thinking it meets the distance requirements for the current setback, but I think the concern is the amount of screening that it provides to those residences. So Jim and I talked before about mounding, and we decided to eliminate that because we thought we could convey that better with trees and not take up as much space. So I think we'd be open to adding some additional trees or even add slats to that fence. But I think the goal was the fence on the east side we wanted that to be chain link for security purposes as opposed to a privacy fence. But if we could provide some screening in that fence and maybe some additional trees to help better screen that from that residential neighborhood, would that satisfy that requirement? Because right now, I don't think we would prefer to go the mounding route due to space limitations and eating up some of the real estate here. But if we could use some,
but is that even in a space that you could build on? I guess most of the time that, a mound is kind of in a setback area, or, that would be within the space that you wouldn't be putting the building in the first place.
Well, we have a 30-foot building setback, and without removing those existing trees that are on this property that the residents had put there, we'd have to start at least 5, 6 feet off the property line before we started the mounding. And then we would come up and then we would slope down. And we're already sloping down elevation wise. I think it's about 4 feet.
Yes.
So that the residences are actually 4 feet higher than the pavement is for this site. So we're coming down already. So even if we went up, 4 feet at a 3-to-1, that's 12 feet, something for the top, and maybe another 4 feet, 16 feet. And then you have to come down 4 feet plus another 4 feet, 8 feet at 3-to-1. That's, 24 feet. We're talking like 60 feet just to get in a 4-foot mound. And is the 4 foot really doing anything there? I think we could probably get some better screening if there was some additional vegetation and then maybe doing something with that fence.
I think originally that's what the suggestion was from the commission, that there'd be a mound and then there'd be trees on top of that. And then the fence, I thought, was the way you guys have described it, going to be something that they really wouldn't see.
Right, this is David Bream. That's the recollection I had. Can somebody pull up the auditor's website and throw the contours up there? Because there was significant discussion last time looking at what was done to protect the neighboring residents to the south by American Showa, where they incorporated the mound and the trees on top of the mound, the vegetation. Obviously, the difference between mounding and a chain link fence, whether there's slats in it or not, is not only for visual, but it's for light, it's for noise. And again, we have industrial right up next to residences here. If somebody could pull that up, I guess I'm just curious, if these contours are correct.
I think
to the property to the south.
And I remember this also from last time. There's a shed there that's technically on the other side of the property line. So putting in a mound, would that disrupt the current, 1, vegetation, and 2, like property owners, what he may be using, right? Is that also of concern? That
We would definitely have to start outside of that shed before we started any kind of mounding.
Right.
And so then, like I said, by the time this is all said and done, there's 60 feet plus, another 6 feet or so. I mean, we're 70 feet in. And one of the things we're also trying to do is provide space between the future buildings and the edge of that slope. Because it does slope down, like I said, the way that it's represented now, but we have 24 feet between the proposed, or for should I say, the future buildings and that slope. So there's another 24-foot gap. If we're doing a 65 feet plus another 20 foot, we're at 90 feet then from the property line. And that's really at a disadvantage to this owner when the current requirements
does the owner with the shed, no, 2 questions. Does the shed have a permanent foundation? And 2, does the owner have an easement to have it there? Again,
No.
I understand the guy's got a shed that may be on your property, but if it's not on a foundation and he doesn't have the right to be there, I guess I'm curious as to why we're making decisions that affect not only his property that eventually will be in future ownership, but all of his neighbors, based upon the fact the shed is over a property line that may or may not be on a permanent foundation.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone can, Jim, I don't know if you guys can answer that.
Yeah, I guess
I'm sure it's just a wood shed, just probably on wood foundation blocks or something. It doesn't look real permanent. I don't know if we have talked to Delco about, this is an easement area. They got a water line down there and there's some confusion. It comes in pretty much down the center of that easement. And then it jogs off into the development. And when it gets across the property line, then a 12-inch line goes due south. So I'm assuming they have some kind of an easement on the residential side of the property line.
They do. Can I share my screen? I don't know who's sharing right now.
I was just gonna say, can somebody share the contours and the utilities? Whoever's doing it.
Joe's got the con.
Can you see that?
Yeah.
Yes.
The blue is the easement and then the contours. So we're around 972 feet at the residences. And then we've got around 966, 6-foot drop here. And then per Jim's comments, here's that easement. And I guess this is more line, not easement, but it is running.
Can you zoom out a little bit, Joe, and show the contours of the Showa property and the mounting to the south as well a little bit?
Yes, one second.
What was done there?
So we're at 982 and where the properties are at 972. So it's a 10-foot mound. And I do recall, and it's listed in the minutes, that I didn't suggest, I mean, that's a massive mound. We didn't ask them to put in a 10-foot mound over a 150-foot span. But something other than using the existing trees and adding some more when you got a building that's what 30 feet off the property lines of the residences.
Well, it's 54 for the future one, but
Well, you were on our call earlier. We've got 80 foot of trees between residence and residence right now, and people are talking about it. We're talking about putting industrial buildings 54 feet off their property line, and there's no mounding. There's not a forest here. Anything that you plant is going to take time to grow. There's going to be an impact. And truthfully, I wouldn't mislead you here. I think we were pretty clear on that was one of the biggest concerns that needed to be addressed. And I don't think you've done that in the most recent submittal.
But are you saying that mounting is the only option here then?
If we saw a landscape plan that was wholehearted in its approach, and I don't mean to talk like this, but it just seemed like it was half-hearted, trying to just get by. And I guess we'd have to look at it. So I don't know. Yeah.
What kind
Somebody
of
else want to step in?
So how? I guess the question is what's the height that we need? Right? What height are we looking for? Does anyone have that?
Personally, I'll just make a comment. We did talk about Showa, and we did talk about that was a mountain, and we weren't really looking for that. I mean, in my opinion, I think if you raise it up even 3 or 4 feet, and you put some pine trees and some things that truly do provide a visual barrier, that's just basic blocking and tackling. I think that we're asking everybody to do, quite frankly, is provide some buffering. I mean, I can't say that I've traveled back there to hear how loud it is. I know the plan calls for 4 of those buildings. So that's going to be quite a bit of work. And again, I'm a big fan of what the Girlings have going on back there, and it's Sunbury. They're great business partners with the village, but we just really need to see something a little more robust. I'm just my thought was it didn't have to be a big mound. To me, it needed to be a combination of vegetation and getting some height with the dirt.
Right. And I think Mr. Parkinson called it out, and the developer didn't address it. And so it says 4 foot per code, 4 foot landscape buffer, and a 3.5 foot average height continuous fence, wall, hedge, or earth mound. And so the code's pretty clear. And it looks like the developer tried to attack it just with trees, from my perspective.
This is David Bream. The difficult thing with using trees is number one, as Joe St. John took it, the time to address, they take time to grow. And number two, they also have a lifespan. And to the extent those trees die or are removed, then you've really lost all of your buffering to the residences. And again, we're not talking about, again, somebody's backyard with a setback and their deck being 80, 90 feet away. We're talking about a 30-foot high industrial building. To the extent, and the precedent beside it is the residents directly to the south have, a significant mound with the trees on top of it. So whatever you do in comparison, whether it's 4 feet with trees on top of it, it's going to pale, but at least it's a good faith effort. That will remain. The mound will always be there, unlike the trees potentially. And we have that throughout the village where we've done, trees have been planted. It's 25 years later, the trees die, they become diseased, they get taken out. And what's planted back is something that has to start over again.
Jim, did you want to chip in?
Well, I'm just wondering what would happen, Nick, if we take the fence back down to the easement line, get it as far away from the property line as we can, the chain link fence, and we dedicate that entire right of way to sloping and mounding, and put maybe just a continuous hedgerow down there. I mean, you're already looking at land that is 4 foot above the floor line of the building. So, and they have 6 foot and 4 foot wood fences on most of those properties. So I think we just got to do something with green. I think bushes probably.
So yeah, I'm looking at the survey here. There's on lot 1435, there's already a 6 foot wood fence. Lot 1436, there's a 4 foot wood fence. Lot 1438, there's a 6 foot wood fence. Lot 1439 has all those trees in the shed.
But again, that's what they've done to.
Well, I know.
So we're asking, what are you going to do? I'm sorry, but we know what's there, and those people are taking a proactive, stance, and we're just, part of your plan can't be their plan.
So the zoning code says you could put a 4 foot hedge in. And is that amenable, or is that, because that's the zoning code. If we proposed a 4 foot hedge.
Well, I would like to hear, I liked what Mr. Etler was talking. I mean, he, originally talked about moving the fence, and again, what we're wanting to see, and we don't have a picture, we don't have anything to talk about, but yeah, what we were looking for was some mounding followed up with some trees. And we're now having a discussion. I mean, we just spent 20 minutes talking about mounding, and we're back to, can we just put in trees again? And
I just want to be clear, the 3.5 foot reference is to the landscape buffering of the parking areas. That is not the building. The building has a different set of standards, which I believe is 6 feet, 6 to 12 feet in height.
Are you talking a combination of mounding and trees?
Yeah, combo of mounding and trees. I think that's what we need to see.
All right. All right, I think we'll move the fence in and do that. Now, there's a point where that mound's going to be coming back down towards their properties. Because we're going to be going higher than their elevations.
We'd expect you to handle the stormwater portion of that and not impact the current residents.
All right. I mean, we got to agree to this to come up with a landscaping plan and some sections and work it out.
yeah, and again, I think we kind of talked about this last time. You don't have to wait till we have a meeting here. I mean, I can always, between I'm sure Mr. Parkinson, Mr. Piles can also convey what we're trying to accomplish and or share with commission members, to keep it going for you. But just as you've heard, it was a little disconcerting that we kind of went away from what we thought we were asking for the last time.
So before we close, I'd like to hit on something that I keep mentioning, and I just want to say it one last time, and then I'm going to stop saying it. And then I want to ask one additional thing. Under architectural review, it notes that exterior walls facing a public street, visible from a public street, or visible from a residential district shall utilize natural materials defined as brick, wood, stone, cultured stone, split face block, stucco, or ephes or cementitious siding. Steel is not considered a natural material. So, the building needs to meet code more architectural elements on those faces that are visible from a public street or from a residential district. The question I don't know is, do we consider the 600 feet distance from the street to be so far that it's not visible from the street, and therefore the face that is the face, if you will, the western elevation does not need to have natural materials because we really can't see it from 600 feet away. And if by virtue of the landscaping and mounding that we've been discussing, we conclude that it's not visible from the residential district because we put in a lot of stuff to keep it from being, does that mean that that neither are visible to this building, and therefore the steel building is acceptable? Or just the fact that it points in those directions, does that make it visible, and therefore we need natural materials on those elevations of the building that face those two directions? I don't know the answer to that, but I keep saying it.
I just want to get clarification too, though, that you keep saying it, but that's not in the submittal. I mean, it's not changed, that it's a four-sided steel building, right?
Correct. That's never been changed.
I mean, I guess, my personal opinion would be, we've already kind of said that in this particular case, it's, behind the front building, and there's such a hodgepodge of stuff on Kentner Parkway. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way. It's just over time developed, and there were different standards along the way. And now as we try and piece it all together, I personally am not concerned with what you see from Kentner Parkway. It's consistent with everything that goes on that street. I am concerned about the back, and I personally would be willing to overlook the steel aspects of the building if it were, if there was some real thought in a landscape plan put in place that said we're gonna place this mounding here, it's not gonna interfere with the drainage that they talked about, and we're gonna put some varied vegetation. I do also personally like to see it have difference of some pine trees, some trees. I mean, it seems like every few years a bug, a virus, something comes along and wipes out and if you have one species of one type of tree, you could have it all gone right away. But that's just me, and I'm one vote there. So anybody else have any comments about what?
No, Mr. Mayor, I agree with you. From Kentner, I think it's far enough away. I don't think we need it. This isn't basically an industrial park. But yes, if we can get proper screening between the residential area and the new building, I don't think we need natural materials on the facade of the building.
And then lastly, I would like to say that I've heard this comment twice, and I'm puzzled that the applicant isn't more interested in it. But I agree with the comments of our commissioners that it's more of a question than a comment, but why can't these buildings slide further to the west? There is room to slide these buildings further to the west to create space at the east end of the building. Yes, you'll have to reconfigure your parking, but you can slide these buildings west. And yes, as you slide them west, they slide south. But you can slide them to where you can still have your corridor that you need to move the vehicles back and forth, and create the space you need at the east end of the development to properly provide for the mounding and the setbacks and everything else that we need to do at that end to truly protect the residential district.
Well, I thought we moved it about as far as we could in order to provide future parking out front and into that pond area to the south of the parking for future buildings. You need so much room between those two buildings. I mean, 100 feet is really about the bare minimum to pull 53-foot semi trailers in and out of those doors. We could move it closer to the pond, but we're going to interfere with our storm drainage. It just did not seem like a good solution at the time. We did have it back further. We have moved it up. I don't know what it was, 20 feet since our first shot at this. But we still have quite a room out back. I know if we have to build a fire access back there, we got to reserve the room behind the future buildings to get the fire trucks. And I would pull the fence in and dedicate that whole 35-foot right of way to do something.
Can I make a suggestion? Can I make a suggestion that we table this and take this discussion offline with our engineer and our zoning inspector? I think Tommy referenced that, but we've got 2 additional applicants still waiting here, and I feel like the past 2 meetings, these particular discussions on this topic have turned into brainstorming sessions and not code interpretation. I'd like to make a motion to table.
Second.
By Mr. St. John. Mr. Elliott, I think I talked on top of you there, but did you second that?
I did.
Okay, sorry about that.
No problem.
Motion to table by Mr. St. John, second by Mr. Elliott. So discussion. So can I guess, can we facilitate a meeting to make that happen for you all?
Yes, I'm available anytime.
Same here.
All right. Well, I'll have Mr. Pyle set something, and we'll continue this conversation. Because truly, we're not trying to be to keep this from happening. We're just trying to make sure that we do the right thing. So I appreciate you all coming this evening, and so roll call on that.
Mr. Ryba,
Yes.
Mr. Lawrence,
Yes.
Mr. Elliott,
Yes.
Mayor Hatfield,
Yes.
Mr. St. John,
Yes.
and Mr. Gokenhour.
Yes.
Applications tabled.
Thank you. All right, we'll talk again. Next up, we have the preliminary plat for Pulte Homes has submitted a preliminary plat application for section 16 of Sunbury Meadows located on the east side of State Route 3 in the northwest corner of the development. 3 lots proposed comprise predominantly of the patio style homes similar to those built on Common Bent. And I believe we've got Mr. Callahan here this evening. I got to find all my, there he is, my squares. Mr. Parkinson, I'll go ahead and we'll let you lead off here by just kind of bringing everybody up to date.
Thank you. This should be shorter and simpler. This is an application by Pulte Homes of Ohio for a preliminary plat for section 16 of Sunbury Meadows. In 2016, council approved an amended development plan and amended development standards for Sunbury Meadows subdivision. And within that amended development plan was a 9.8 acre portion of property along State Route 3 that was annotated as sub-area F, a flex community area. Within that, Sunbury was granted an option to purchase this property as a community recreation facility.
Yeah,
That option has expired.
Okay, did you leave the meeting?
Without.
What?
I just want to make sure you exit out of the meeting so we're not having our
Yes.
conversation over their Zoom meeting.
Who's talking?
Mr. Etler's talking with Nick, I believe.
He muted. He muted now.
So that option has expired without Sunbury purchasing the property. The amended development plan provided that should Sunbury not execute the option, that it would, the applicable standards as set forth in sub-areas B and E would apply. Sub-area E is the patio homes. It's a section that pertains to patio homes, which is Common Bent Drive, and is described in the amended development plan as low maintenance residential. The basic standards of this are 50-foot lots, 20-foot setbacks for front yards, 20-foot rear setbacks, 15-foot patios and decks can encroach 5 feet into the rear setback. The side setback of 5 feet, some of 10, and a 45% maximum lot coverage. I'm going to maybe share my screen just quickly. This is the preliminary plat for Sunbury Meadows section 16. It's 8.9 acres. It is in the PRD development area. It's 33 lots, which is 3.7 lots per acre. There is a very small open space being dedicated, which is part of the multi-use trail. Predominantly is either 50-foot wide lots for patio homes, 50-foot right-of-ways, 28-foot streets. In response to comments from the village, there is a 70-yard rear setback for those properties that touch State Route 3. This results in the rear building line being 125 feet from the center line of State Route 3. We had asked for as much as possible. That was a good effort at that. Front yard setback is 20 feet except for these 5 lots right here, which are on this main drag, and these are the setbacks are consistent with the other houses along this street. Matt, I apologize. What's the name of that street?
It's Peacock Drive.
Thank you. So the main entrance is sort of down here to the left, lower left. This is Peacock Drive. So the other houses are in other sections of Sunbury Meadows. These 5 are in section 16, and they're designed to match the others on Peacock Drive. In other comments, we had significant comment about landscaping along, well, mostly we said Route 3 here to protect these properties. The applicant provided a fairly robust landscape plan for along Sunbury State Route 3, and it turns a corner and comes this way a little bit here to the south. So as people traveling this way will be protected from view as well. So that was another good example of trying to address our concerns. We did have one slight comment we made that there was a little bit of pushback, and the argument was reasonable, I think. We asked if maybe these lots right here could have a 25-foot setback, front yard setback. And the defense was that that would make these out of character with the remainder of the development. It would also move these houses 5 feet closer to that existing houses back here by pushing them off the road and closer to the rear property line. So the applicant desired to maintain the 20-foot front yard setback for these, contrary to our comment. In hindsight, I find that a reasonable defense to the plan. I'm sure as Mr. Callahan will share with you, I'll steal his thunder. This is the last development section of Sunbury Meadows. So we'll all shed a tear here as this project comes to an end, as we look forward to new ones coming. But this is it, last one. So with that, Mayor, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, I didn't know. Okay, we'll go ahead and start with Mr. Callahan first. I was going to let other people ask questions, but I don't know if you wanted to make any comments or feedback to what Mr. Parkinson just shared.
Just a couple real brief ones. First of all, good evening. Thanks for having me, and good to see everyone, even if virtually. Dave, thanks for the report. And you did steal a little bit of my thunder there. This, as you mentioned, this is the last section. Hard to believe after a few short 15 years or so, and some of us were even there when it started. But yeah, this is the last section. We do plan to continue on as essentially a natural extension of the retreat section on Common Bent, and offer the same or similar home styles that are on in that area. Dave's report covered most of it. Just a few things that I'll touch on real quickly. The landscape buffer, we did come up with that design after fairly extensive conversations with representatives of the village. And I think there's a total of 64, if I'm not mistaken, 8-foot spruce trees planned as part of that buffer, and a few deciduous trees mixed in as well. Also, yeah, they're 8 foot high, so we're putting in fairly substantial, mature trees right from the onset to have the most impact. And then Dave did cover, just touching on the one request on the setback for the lots along what would essentially be the eastern portion of the site. In addition to maintaining a little more separation from the existing homes on Common Bent, it also allows us to offer more options to the buyer. So things that they want to add on rear extensions of the home, like sunroom extensions or things like that, we're able to offer more of those options to the buyers depending upon which floor plan and which options they would want to choose. So beyond that, I don't really have a whole lot more to add, but I'd be happy to answer any questions if I can.
All right, any of the commission members have any questions?
I'll ask a question. Is the access from Common Bent Drive, or is it going to be from the other road? I think you said it was Peacock.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Dave.
Yeah, it comes off of Peacock. There's no access directly to Common Bent.
Okay. And there's no access then to 3 either. I'm assuming it's only the main entrance. Okay.
Dave Parkinson, just for clarification, the houses basically from T24 to T33, the ones that you were speaking of, the 20-foot setback. With that 20-foot setback, will somebody be able to park in the driveway without covering the sidewalk?
Yes, that's about the minimum you can do. Cars aren't quite 20 feet long. Now, maybe your big old Ford dually thing might spill onto the sidewalk a little bit, but most cars can fit in a 20-foot driveway without overlapping into the sidewalk.
So the 20-foot comes to the sidewalk, not past it?
Correct. The sidewalks are built in the right of way, and the setback is from the right of way.
Thank you.
Yeah, you can clearly see over on Common Bent. I run that loop quite a bit, and it's one or two cars parked in every driveway and they're off the sidewalk. And I do like it being consistent. I mean, personally, I think I was a little concerned if those houses on Peacock would be, would it look different if you had the first, I don't know, was it 5 or 4? At a different setback than the remaining. Other questions?
I'm new, and so I apologize. Is there a reason the village didn't purchase that back, that land? I don't know if that's for another call or just curious, honestly.
No, we were trying to work with the Y and had a couple of different eyes. It was more in the mindset of originally of a community center space. That never got going. We had briefly thought about it from even a municipal, a facilities kind of place, whether that's, moving the offices there at some point, but we ran out of time and they gave us plenty of time, but this just didn't work out for us.
Okay.
Kind of how I remember it anyway.
Right, and specifically to kind of elaborate on that, we did engage in discussions with the Y. They did a study, and I don't remember the exact timing of it, but the reality of it was we just didn't have the population to justify that. There was a joint venture that and the schools, I think, are on the agenda, so they'll remember this. There's a joint venture we tried with the schools for a recreational district that would have included a Y years ago, quite a few years ago now, that had used the entire school district as the blueprint for it, but that it required voter approval, and it went down pretty overwhelmingly. So they had to look just at the village of Sunbury population, and frankly, Delaware is 40-some thousand. Being 5,000 residents just really isn't enough for them to get excited, and that kind of killed it at that point. As far as we were kind of at the end of our time frame, really looking at that option. From a municipal facility standpoint, that really, and not having access onto 3 itself, we kind of looked at other options and really haven't come up with an alternate solution, but it never really gained traction for that.
Thank you.
This is Rick Grubb. I just had a question for Pulte. It looks like since this is your final one, there's one outstanding issue on Sunbury Meadows West. The detention area on Saffron Drive needs to be changed from pre-construction sediment erosion control to that of post-construction stormwater detention. Just want to make sure this was going to be taken care of before you were done in Sunbury here. I think you guys received a message today from a property management company for the HOA.
Yeah, I'm not personally familiar with the message that was received today, but I have been engaged in discussions on that area. One of our representatives has been out to look at the area and sent me some pictures over here just recently within the last few weeks. And I know that we are involved and active in converting that area, as you just mentioned.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Anybody would like to make a motion?
I hate to bring this up, and I'm sure, Matt, you're aware of it, but I'll bring it up anyway. The talk of the town is the opening of the swimming pool. I've literally had a half a dozen people in the past week question me about, I hear Pulte's not opening the pools all summer. My kids are going nuts. I assured them that I doubted that was the case. We were probably waiting on the leeway from the governor's office to be able to do it safely, but quickly anything, because these people, along with me, when you're in a zoning board member or anybody in a position like that, they get the questions. Anything you can give us that we can relay on to these residents?
Yeah, and I'd be happy to share the message with you. I could send it to Stephen or anybody else to pass along to everyone. But we have made the decision, not just here, but in any of the other pools in our communities that fall within our, decision-making, to not open them for the time being, essentially just following the guidance of the governor, as well as the Delaware General Health District also issued guidelines that suggested against opening. We are continuing to, we've made all the normal preparations that you would to open the pool. And we're going to continue with the biweekly cleanings and treatments of the pool so that hopefully, if and when the guidance from the state and the county changes, that we can pretty quickly pivot to go ahead and open those based on conversations with the pool maintenance company and our property manager. They can, with continuing to treat them and maintain them, they can pivot and have them ready to open within 5 days once that guidance from the state changes. But for now, unfortunately, I think like a lot of not only private HOA type pools, but also municipal pools in a lot of different cities, villages, townships, they've kept pools closed for now. So yeah, that's the current situation. Hopefully it changes soon for all of us.
Thank you.
The application is ready for a motion and a vote on the preliminary plan.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
Second by Mr. Riva. Discussion. Roll call.
Mr. Lawrence,
Yes.
Mr. Elliott,
Yes.
Mayor Hatfield,
Yes.
Mr. St. John,
Yes.
Mr. Gokenhour,
It's on mute.
he's got it.
Thank you, Greg.
Mr. Gokenhour
Yes.
and Mr. Riva.
Yes.
Okay, it passed.
All right.
Thank you all. Good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Last but not least, that brings us up to the site plan for the Big Walnut School District.
Where's Chris?
We need to wake everybody up.
Turn the camera back on.
No more naps.
Everyone, thank you.
All right, so Dave, we'll go ahead and let you.
Thank you for.
Am I up?
Yeah, we're having Andy's having a little audio problem there, but yeah, we'll go ahead and Dave, get things kicked off real quick here.
All right. The Big Walnut Schools submitted an application package continuing their work at the elementary and high school site, 100-acre site immediately north of Sunbury Industrial Park. The application included landscape plans for the high school and elementary school and the overall site in general. It included the stadium, the grading and the stormwater, photometrics for the lighting of the stadium and around the stadium. It included the softball field, the baseball field. It included the tennis courts. And it also included a concession stand and an athletics storage building. We've reviewed all of these. They were pretty straightforward and simple. The function, location of all of the elements, I'm going to share my screen here. Give me a second, I'm lost. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. So generally, this is the overall site plan with the entrance drive coming in, the high school here, the elementary school is here, and then here's the back door down to Kentner Parkway. The stadium is as was shown, the ball fields are as was shown. They're only building 2 today. 2 of the 4 are being built. The tennis courts are in the location that was shown. The base bid is for 5 of them, and then there's an alternate bid for the other 5. There are no permanent stadium stands for the tennis or baseball facilities, and neither the baseball, softball, or tennis facilities are lit. Only the stadium and the surrounding walk areas are lit. There is some storm and grading that goes with this that is consistent with the original plan, and it connects into the originally installed facilities and is managed through the existing stormwater management facilities constructed with the project. I didn't want to go through all of these, but there's the stadium height is, I think we said 47, 48 feet tall to the top of the press box. They did receive a variance from building height as part of the original packages. So back to here we go. Sorry, I'm lost here for a second. I can't figure out how to open this. It's interesting. Oh, there we go. There we go. So that's the application. The landscape plan it consists of 53 deciduous trees, 8 ornamentals, 13 evergreens, some shrubs and grasses. The trees are distributed throughout the site, the parking and perimeter. The landscaping is focused mostly at the front door of each of the schools. The zoning code does recognize the difference between lighting for outdoor recreational facilities and for lighting for other commercial and industrial type facilities. We've walked through a discussion on the light pollution or the spillage onto the neighboring property. We think it's reasonable. The neighboring property is currently row crops. And so we do not see any impact of this light pollution or spillage onto the neighboring property. A response to my comment yielded that they continue to work toward reducing the amount of spillage onto the neighbor. That's the report. That's what they've offered. We take no exceptions to the plans that were submitted. We think they are consistent with the original approvals.
All right, we'll go ahead and turn it over to whoever there with the school is going to follow up.
All right, can you hear me okay now?
Yep.
All right, sorry about that. Hi, thank you everyone for hanging in there with us tonight. I'm going to turn it very quickly over to the folks with all the information, our Director of Facilities, Doug Schwartz, and Chris Dumford, our architect with BSWC, and they're going to talk through a few more points. Thanks.
Thank you, Superintendent Hamburg. Good evening, everybody. Mr. Mayor, members of the commission, Mr. Parkinson. Happy to be back in front of you talking about the new schools project. And as Dave Parkinson said, this is our final phase of submission, if you will. You recall we had a CM at risk delivery model that allowed us to create a master plan, a master program, and then we've chewed off pieces of it as we've designed it, bid it, and built it, if you will. This is the final phase. I wanted to add 2 comments to what he said, and then I'm going to turn it over to Chris Dumford, our lead architect with BSWC. First, the landscape plan, just to remind you, is in full conformance with the development agreement signed between the village and the school board earlier this year. So there was some language in there. We ensured we were in alignment with that. And then the photometric study relative to the football field, the recreational facility, if you will. I just want to remind this committee, it's not on the application. Previously, we had submitted the photometric study for the full site, meaning the parking, the sidewalks, the wayfinding, the drives, et cetera. And that was part of a previous submittal. Again, as Dave pointed out, this is strictly for the athletic field. And with that, I'm going to turn over to Chris Dumford, and we're going to lead you, because we were told, quote unquote, to sell it. We're probably going to be a little more, no surprise here, a little more interactive and a little more demonstrative and walking you through the document. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chris.
Okay. Am I able to take control of the screen?
If you behave yourself, yes. We'll
All right. All right. Can everybody see that?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So this is the overall site plan. I'm going to try not to repeat too much of what Mr. Parkinson already covered. But as you said, main entrance is off of Miller Drive. Down here, we do have a secondary access off of Kittner. So the main drive, which does have a bike path alongside of it, all the way from Miller, all the way up into the school property. And then the secondary access for bus and deliveries. General organization of the site, elementary school, high school, athletic complex. There is this little building here is a central energy plant building. So there was one building that houses the main mechanical equipment for the whole site. That's this little rectangular building over here. Moving on to the landscape plan, I'll just highlight a couple of things here. Most of the trees on the site that are shown on this plan diagrammatically are at the hardscape areas. There are other trees. So most of the trees that we're using on the site are trees that are indigenous to Ohio. There are some trees. There's a note here. I'm going to zoom in around the perimeter where it says perimeter tree line supplemented with native trees by USF&W, U.S. Fish and Wildlife. And that note is found on all three sides of the property. So the idea there is to maintain the vegetative strip that runs along the three sides of the property and kind of infill that in to maintain that for a wildlife buffer around the property. And then secondly, outside of trees, as Dave mentioned, around the front entrances, we do have a little bit of landscaping to dress up the front entrances. But in addition to that, in the detention pond areas, there's a planting mix that's going to be provided again by USF&W to have those filled not with lawn or with gravel or anything, but with native plants to be a better solution for that. And I'll turn it back over to Doug briefly, just talk about the relationship between the district and U.S. Fish and Wildlife.
So again, just wanted to kind of highlight for, I think the mayor maybe already knows this and many of the members, but just want to reiterate it one last time. So the board has undertaken an agreement or partnership with U.S. Fish and Wildlife, actually out of their Newark, Ohio office. And they did with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife to create learning labs and other things on an intermediate school site out there in Granville, Ohio. And I just want to note for the commission what the U.S. Fish and Wildlife said in terms of selecting us or agreeing to partner with us. They said we shared a common objective to restore habitat for the benefit of federal trust species. The goal of supporting priority actions identified in the regional partners for fish and wildlife program strategic plan. Wow, is that a mouthful? The short version is they've agreed to plant native grasses and native wildflowers in 7 acres of detention ponds. All 4 ponds as shown on the plan are identified, and Chris just walked you through many of them. What we believe is important of that is first it returns and recreates natural habitat for animals, birds, pollinators, etc. We also believe it creates a lot of learning opportunities for students, staff, family members, the community, everything from art, photography, science, believe it or not, music, literature, etc. We're really excited for some of the learning opportunities. And ultimately, it means we don't have to take care of, especially the detention ponds to the south. You don't have to mow those or spend any money. For 10 years, U.S. Fish and Wildlife maintains them. That's a savings to the district in terms of operations. The trees, I just wanted to expand upon that. Again, these are not the trees that are shown in the parking lots and around the perimeter drives. These are 1-inch caliber trees that U.S. Fish and Wildlife has agreed to plant.
and they're essentially reinforcing the migratory and or foraging paths that already exist naturally around the perimeter of the site and the 10 acres forested area in the southwest section of the site. So they're really enhancing what's there. There are notes calling out, I don't believe we actually call out 100 trees, but they will easily plant that many. And it's just to build upon that which we already have on the site and further enhance it. Their goal is obviously to enhance it for animals, deer, squirrels, birds, etc. Ours is obviously a couple-fold nature, screening, and just to enhance the property as a whole. So just wanted to share that in terms of what we're doing through Fish and Wildlife, and happy to answer any questions. For now, though, I think I'm turning it back to Chris. We'll continue through and maybe do Q&A at the end, I believe is your format. Thanks, Chris.
Okay. So I'll move on to the athletic area. So again, the overall site plan here. This is a slightly blow up version. So the two ball fields that are developed are on the east side of the site. The two that are future will be on the west. The tennis courts, the 5 courts on the north would be the ones that would be first developed if only 5 of them are built, and then to the south would be the other 5. To the south of these fields are the stadium and the concession building, which I'll go to on the next plan. So just a few facts about the stadium. This is a multi-use stadium for football, soccer, lacrosse, track. There is an 8-lane track. There's at the ends in what we call the D areas, there's pole vault, there's high jump, and we have long jump here and another long jump. There's also a scoreboard video screen in the end as well. The bleachers, the home bleachers on this side seat 3,246, so 3,246 seats with a press box on top. Visitor bleachers over on the east side, the ones closest to the east property line, seat about 765 seats. So that's kind of the scope of the stadium. I'm gonna jump ahead here to the concession building. And this is just quickly a plan of the concession building, just so you understand what that building is going to house. There's really 3 components. There is a ticketing room, which faces the high school, and there's a plaza out in front. That's kind of on the outside of the fenced in area. In the middle are the bathrooms. And so there's a men's bathroom, a women's bathroom, dividable in the middle so that there can be separation for home and visitor bathrooms, or they can be combined for events that don't need the separation. And then the third component is the concession room. So that serves both the home and the visitor side, again, separated by a fence to keep the sides separated. So that is the concession building. The exterior materials. So let me hop to page 32. So this was part of the submittal, shows kind of the exterior view of the concession building, and that's the athletic storage building. I wanted to zoom in here to make a point about the fencing. So on either side of the concession building is a decorative gate structure that has big gates for people to come in and out and to secure the facility. And then the rest of the fencing is all chain link fencing, and some of it's 6 foot, some of it's 4 foot. But you can see it going here around the perimeter and then around the track. And so there's a good amount of fencing. The materials that you can see sort of represented here are the same materials that we're using on the high school and the elementary school. We have brick on the exterior. There's some fiber cement siding, which has a wood look, shingle, sloped shingle roof, and then some metal panels in the gable areas. And we do have a rendering that we're working on. This isn't a finished rendering, but this does kind of give you a flavor of what the concession building will look like. You can see the in the background the home bleachers and the press box there. And again, these materials are all consistent with the materials that are being used on the other buildings.
And Chris, real quick, this was not part of our submittal, but we're happy to provide it to the village if you want it in any fashion.
Yep, good point. Yes, and that's the only thing I've shown that wasn't in your packet. I thought it might be helpful. The final piece is the photometric, and I just want to highlight one page here. This is one of the 2 pages that shows the lighting levels at the property line. So just highlighting a couple things. There's 4 light poles. You see these F1, F2, F3, and F4. The 2 on the visitor's side, which are closest to the east property line, are 90-foot poles. The 2 on the home side are 100-foot poles. And these are LED fixtures, high efficiency. They've got really good cutoff. So that does, even though they're fairly close to the property line, they are able to get low lighting levels. You can see this 5.5 that's the highest lighting level at the property line, and that's in the horizontal plane. The next page shows that it's under 8-foot candles in the vertical plane. So as was mentioned, those are really good cutoff, and it trails off to 0 very quickly. And again, we're working that to try to bring that down a little bit, but with these new fixtures, they're really good to have low cutoff. So that's really the extent that we wanted to cover. I do have access to all the drawings, so if there's any other drawings you want to specifically look at, happy to do that. Any questions you have, happy to answer them. And I'll go ahead and relinquish control here.
All right, thank you. Anybody have any questions or would you like to ask?
Just I'm interested. The LED lighting is is that dimmable? So like as the sun goes down, they start to ramp up, or is it just kind of on off?
That's a good question. I don't want to speak out of turn. Generally speaking, LED lighting is dimmable. That's one of the big advantages of it. It's very easily dimmable. I'm not sure if I know we have it set up to be programmed to have a couple different lighting levels. So like a security level where it could just be lit for, if a minimal amount of lighting wanted to be held on, like after a track event or something, just to let people get in and out, and then the full lighting level. I can't remember if there's full dimming capabilities on this lighting. Do you remember, Doug, from our discussions?
I think it had the option, but because of cost, we opted to do more of the stepped approach you just spoke of.
Okay. And then as a probably the wrong meeting, but as a mechanical engineer, do we get to see the mechanicals at all? I'm just interested.
It's typically not part of a zoning submittal, but
right.
But I mean, they're submitted to the state right now for plan review, and so I'd be happy to share them with you if you'd like to see them.
My nerd curiosity wouldn't mind it. So
I was just thinking I'm going to have Greg to my next party.
Yeah, the mechanicals for the concession building are pretty simple.
Right.
It's there is a little bit of air conditioning in the two the ticketing in the concession building, but the rest of it's just ventilated. It is heated space. It is intended to be heated all year round. It's conditioned at least for freeze proof.
Thank you. Other questions? Come on, it's only 10:24. We can keep these guys till 11, can't we? All right, anything else from any? So we just need a motion and a vote on this. I just want to, is there any contingencies? Everything's good to go?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Motion to approve by Mr. St. John.
Second.
The yellow box didn't light up quick enough. Who was the second?
I think maybe Joe did it first.
All right, Joe St. John, or Joe Gokenauer.
It sounded like him.
Okay. Discussion or comments? Roll call.
Mr. Lawrence,
Yes.
Mr. Elliott,
Yes.
Mayor Hatfield,
Yes.
Mr. St. John,
Yes.
Mr. Gokenhour,
Yes.
and Mr. Ryba.
Yes.
6 ayes. It's good.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
All
all.
right, thank you, guys.
Thanks,
Good
guys.
night.
You too.
All right, and we still have more to go. Anybody like to, or everybody get a chance to review the meeting minutes from April 22nd, 27th?
Make a motion to approve.
Motion to approve the minutes by Mr. Joe St. John.
Second.
Ryba.
Okay, second, Mr. Ryba.
Great job on those minutes, Steve.
Well put together.
Roll call.
Mr. Elliott,
Yes.
Mayor Hatfield,
Yes.
Mr. St. John,
Yes.
Mr. Gokenhour,
Yes.
Mr. Ryba,
Yep.
and Mr. Lawrence.
Yes.
All right, thanks. I'm pretty sure Steve has compiled a very significant zoning report that he'd like to cover in depth with us. Yeah.
I read it all. It was good. Good job, Steve. I approve.
You've been brutalized enough tonight. It's included. I sent it to you. If you have questions or comments, please feel free to contact me, or we can set up another Zoom meeting for tomorrow at 12 o'clock.
Anybody have any pressing questions for Steve?
No, I just say thank you for a thorough report.
You're welcome.
There you go. A good report, and you don't have to talk about it. All right. Next on here, we have new business or anything old that we need to discuss.
Nope.
All right. Everybody good with the next meeting being 6/22? We could push it out. Is that what you're, I'm sorry. Are you insinuating with that comment, Steve, that we could go later? I guess I didn't ask that.
Yeah, it says Friday, but he means Monday.
Yeah. There we go. So I'm okay with 5 Fridays.
It was, I just thought I'd mention there was a 5th Monday or Friday, but at this point, other than Mr. Elter and his building, I don't know if we've got anything coming over the horizon. So let's keep it when it is, and Mr. Parkinson and I will rally with him and Mr. Amazian.
Yeah, I will, I'll be out of town, but you guys don't need me, so I just double check. Is there any other very limited vacation plans with lots of social distancing on anybody else?
I got the opposite of that, but
okay.
Yeah, I'll be gone for a while at the end of the month as well.
All right. Well, if that's it, then if we're good on keeping 6/22, have no other agenda items. Does anybody else have anything?
Only that I think this probably set a record. I mean, we always used to start at 7:30. I never remember zoning going to 11:30. So Greg, don't run away. Stick around.
Yeah.
I'm here for the long haul.
I think it's Greg's fault. He's the only new guy here.
Hey, Dave, don't move to Genoa then, because that's a regular thing.
This was, yeah, and it was Zoom nevertheless, so.
Yeah.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Motion by Joe and second by, I missed the second. Was that Rick?
Yep.
Okay, roll call on the adjournment.
Let's see, we've had enough agenda items to come back to Mayor Hatfield,
Yes.
Mr. St. John,
Yes.
Mr. Gokenhour,
Yes.
Mr. Lawrence,
Yes.
Mr. Ryba,
Yes.
and Mr. Elliott.
Yes.
Thank you, Iron Man.
Thanks,
Have a good night, guys. Thanks.
You're
Bye.
right.
Thank you.
Got
Bye.
it done.
Wow. That was long.